The next thing that we want to do is to actually handle those error messages that are not exceptions, like PHP warning, PHP notices. So if we have an error in our code that leads to a PHP warning, we are not going to be able to cache it using the exception handler because it is not an exception. So what we want to do is to actually be able to convert all of these to exceptions and then throw them in a way that our application will be able to handle it using the handler that we've just set. So that's going to be the last thing that we need to do regarding exception handling for our application. So before we get into that, so let's quickly look at PHP warning and notices. Okay, so let's see. Let's try and go to the PHP documentation. And then scroll down. So we can see right here we have the different level of error messages. So we have errors, warning, pass, and notice. So as we have said, errors are actually being handled by the error exception class, which implements throwable. But when we talk about warning, notice, and pass, these are not being handled by the error exception class. So what we can do is to actually convert them to exception anytime they occur in our application, and then we can then handle them as I mentioned previously. So what we want to do quickly is to create another method inside of our, let's set this to true first, then come inside of our exception handler, and then we want to create one more method here. So I'm going to say public function convert warning and notices to exception. So that's a very long one. So basically this function is going to take 4 arguments. So which are the arguments that we will expect when a PHP actually throws a warning or a notice. So that will be the severity. So we want to call this severity. That'll be the first argument, and then the message will be the second one, and then the file if that is available, and also the line number. And then we can actually now pass this to an exception. So there's a mistake here, so I should correct that. Okay, so the only thing that we now need to do here is to just throw a new exception. So we're going to say throw new error exception, so PHP error exception, and then we can then pass it all of this. So I'm just going to grab this, and then we are going to change the order. So the message should actually be here. For exception, message will be first, and then we want to actually duplicate this, okay? Because if we go to the definition, so you can see here message, code, the severity, the file, and then also the line number. Okay, so we could duplicate this for the code, or we could just set the code to 500 since this is an exception. But since we're not really sure, and we are actually doing a conversion here, so it's just okay for us to leave it like this. So I'm going to get rid of this and then just add this to the use statement. And then finally we can come again to index. So before we actually use the exception handler, we are going to attempt to make a call to the database using invalid information. So we're going to use MySQLi. So let's say MySQLi, and then we're going to just pass it a bunch of wrong values. So let's say the host is wrong, and also let's say the username is correct, and let's say the password is also correct, but the host is wrong. And then the database name, let's call this bug. And now we can do a reload on the browser. See, everything works as intended. All right, so we get an error here, a warning. Okay, so MySQLi construct, the host name that we specified does not exist. Okay, and then we actually get the other exceptions. This is because I did not terminate the script here. So if we terminate it here, we don't get the other exceptions. So what we now want to do is to actually use our own custom error handler. So we're going to say set error handler. And then we're also going to pass this in an array and say new exception handler. So let's say exception handler, and then this time we're going to copy that long function name. So let's come back to the class exception handler and then just copy this. And what should happen is that this should actually intercept that warning, convert it to an exception, and then throw that particular exception, which is going to be the PHP error exception. So let's see if things work as expected. All right, so now we don't see that warning anymore. We now see object of error exception. Okay, so everything works as intended, the way that we want it to work. So looks good. And we can now actually do one more stuff here before we actually wrap up. So we're going to create a file here and then just call it exception. Okay, so basically what we want to do in this file is to move both function to inside of that file. Okay, and then let's come again to right here and put our street type declaration. So we're going to declare street type should be equal to 1. And then I could actually grab this and then put it in all the other files. Yeah, so let's just add it to all the files that we have here. Okay, so now we are done with exception handling, error handling, and everything is ready to go. We haven't put this in the right place yet, so we just have this file here, but somehow we're going to have a way to bootstrap our application. That's when we begin to tie things together. But for now, we can basically just require it. So we can say require once, and then we can tap into that. And basically we want to go into the SRC folder. So we're going to say SRC, and then we want to go into the exception folder, and then we want to get that file called exception.php, and everything should still work as intended. All right, so that will be all for exceptions. In the next part, we're going to start discussing about logging, and after that we're going to set up things for running unit tests.